welcome to the latest Moviescramble podcast. Your favourite dynamic duo are back with me on hosting duties and our very own highly esteemed land baron John joining me for the session today. John, how are you?
I knew there would be some sort of dig in there.
Couldn't help it.
Yeah, I'm currently sitting in the East Wing because the sun's better there in the morning for me, and
Yes.
Obviously in the countryside because it's better for my health. So yes, all very good. It's a lovely, lovely day, which is very nice indeed, and I'm interested to hear what you think about this film that we're going to talk about today.
Okay, so on that mysterious note, today we are going to be discussing Nikolai Arcel's historical drama, The Promised Land, or Bastarden, as it's known in its native Danish. The film is set in 1755 and tells the true story of Ludwig Kalen, played by Mads Mikkelsen, who attempts to cultivate the barren and inhospitable Jylland Heath. He is faced with an instant opposition and foul play from the ruthless county judge Frederick de Schinkel, played by Simon Bennebjerg, and is also sheltering 2 fugitive servants and an orphaned traveller girl. Can he really make this little square of Denmark into a thriving community? So, what were your first impressions of the film, and did you know much about it beforehand?
I knew nothing about it beforehand whatsoever. I hadn't heard of the film until you suggested that we talk about it, because obviously you had seen it. You'd got a DVD copy of it or something, you said?
Yeah.
Or something? Yeah. I knew very little about it at all. And once you suggested that, I went into it totally blind. I didn't watch any trailers. I didn't read anything about it apart from your review of it.
Oh, no, I haven't reviewed it.
Have you not? I thought you had.
No. No, I just not stopped talking about it.
Yeah, okay, right, fair enough, right. So I didn't know anything about the film whatsoever, apart from it was Mads Mikkelsen, and it was it was a Danish film. That was the only truth. I didn't know it was a period film or anything, so I went into it and started watching it, and I was kind of taken with it quite nicely because from the very start I could relate to it because it looks like a Western. And I thought, okay, right. You know, it's these vast landscapes and everything, all the open areas where you know, weather changes in an instant and all that. And he's on a horse for some of it as well. So yes. All kind of ties in, yeah. So yes, I was quite surprised by it because I didn't know what to expect. I had no idea. Even the name of it, The Promised Land, doesn't mean anything to me because that could be anything. That could be a religious film, you know.
Yeah.
So it could have been anything at all. And I thought, yeah, it's not too bad. I liked the fact that it was a very beautiful film as well, which it looks great. But we can talk about that later on as well, obviously. Yeah. But yes, I was quite impressed by it, to be honest, on sort of first impressions. So yes, what about yourself?
Yeah, so I went into it blind. I'd seen the press tour, obviously, which had various controversies sort of along the way, and I knew that it was sort of gunning for sort of international recognition, I think, through the Oscars as well. But again, went into it totally blind. And for me, yeah, I mean, the film definitely felt like Western vibes to me as well. And I think that because we've been speaking about The Dead Don't Hurt as well, throughout it, I was actually kind of thinking how that would be quite a nice pairing to watch together, kind of similar sort of themes and this whole notion of sort of conquering your own little piece of land, goodies, baddies, love story, all that sort of thing. So I really like those kind of classic elements, really, although it's telling a different story in terms of I'm not obviously familiar with what was happening in Denmark in the 1700s, but I quite like sort of those points of sort of film that you could recognise. So yeah, I mean, I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought that there was, you know, so much that we could talk about in terms of characterization, cinematography, all that sort of thing. So yeah, I think that Western's definitely one genre that stands out. Was there any sort of other genres that you kind of saw in it? Period drama obviously being quite a...
Yeah, they're obviously the whole period drama thing through some of the, well, just the fact that it's set, like you say, 1755, and the way that they're dressed, it's all wigs and long coats and all this sort of stuff. It's all... You know, it evokes a certain sort of feeling because you've kind of seen that before, and you see it even now in like sort of television dramas, like things like Bridgerton, when they're all dressed like that, even though it's set slightly later. It's the same sort of idea of how they actually hold themselves. But you've also got a political drama in there as well. You've got the whole political machinations with the king and the local landowners and how they all interact with each other. You have a couple of different love stories. You've got the small abandoned child story. And this may sound like, on the sort of face of it, the way I'm describing it, it's like a bit cliched. Oh, we've kind of seen all this before. This is kind of, yeah, it's not very new, but you've got to remember, this is a real story. And it was set hundreds of years before other sort of people have come up with these sort of ideas, especially like the Westerns. The Westerns all set sort of late 1800s, or sort of mid to late 1800s. So a lot of the stories that we are used to seeing, sort of fictional stories from that time, are taken from real life events like this, because it would be the European settlers who moved to America in the first place, and they would hand down these stories of people doing these things, sort of the old campfire stories and all that about people, doing the right thing and all that. And you've also got the fact that the film's title itself, obviously in English it's called The Promised Land, but in Danish it's called Bastarden, which is Danish for the bastard. Now, I did read an interview with the director on this, and he was saying the name doesn't have the same connotations in Danish as it does in English now. And a bastard in English, it's all, of of dubious parentage, shall we say. But it's also used as a derogatory term, whereas in Danish it's not used in that way. It's used as, in just the actual dictionary definition, it's someone who does not have a father, or doesn't have a mother, or obviously has a mother, but doesn't have a sort of named father, and that's the end of it. It's not used in that sort of bad way, but I can understand why they changed the name of it, because it's difficult enough to sell a film without trying to sell a film that they say, yep, we've got this film, it's set in Denmark in 1755 and it's called The Bastard. Yeah. What do you mean, take no money?
In fairness, if somebody had said to me, there's a Mads Mikkelsen costume drama called The Bastard, I'd have been like, have all my money. Then I'm a different type of cinema goer. I think for me as well, there's also sort of a kind of identity drama as well, because you kind of get the impression that obviously Ludwig is trying to forge an identity for himself, not in the same way that Dushenkel is, because obviously we'll come to him later. He's got his own sort of machinations for who he's going to be in life.
Yeah.
But also Denmark itself is trying to sort of pull itself together as a country and work out, its sort of land boundaries, what parts of the country are going to be useful for cultivating settlements, all that sort of thing. So it's not just about the individual, it's about the sort of nation as a whole working out its place in Europe at the time, I guess.
Yeah, there's all those sort of elements, but it's not so much how they're working out how they're going to fit in a bigger Europe, it's how they're actually going to identify as a nation. And the fact that so much of the land in Denmark was unused because it was deemed to be uninhabitable. It was terrain where, what did they say, it was mostly sand. And you saw that in the opening, one of the opening scenes, after Ludwig got permission to actually go out into the heath. He was given a royal charter in order to set up a settlement, basically because he didn't ask for any money to do it, because that's the usual thing. They ask for money, try to set up a settlement, it fails, money disappears. And he says, no, I'm just going to do it on my own. And what you saw, the opening scenes were him going out, digging boreholes everywhere, and it was all sand and horrible, and just didn't work at all. So that kind of set out the problems that they actually had as a nation trying to expand, because obviously the country itself was getting bigger. It was obviously reasonably prosperous because there were landowners for starters. It's always, there's always money where there are landowners, then there's money to be made, let's face it. So it was kind of, there was a national identity, but there was also the identity of Ludwig himself, because when he was of age, he didn't join the Danish army. He was sent away and joined the German army. I don't know what that actually meant.
So they do explain that Dushenko makes a jibe at him to say that, you know, his mother must have got pregnant off of her master, and her master was famous for sending his bastards away to the German army in the hope that that would get rid of them and they wouldn't come back. So it is sort of explained as to why he didn't join and serve for his own country.
Right, okay, that makes sense, I suppose. Now, I suppose we're more used to the fact that very few people go from one country now to another in order to represent their military forces. It's all kind of internal. You join the British Army, for instance. You don't go away and join the French Army or whatever, you know. Aye, that kind of makes sense now, but yeah, it does. So yeah, I thought there was a lot going on if you looked for it. If you didn't look for it, it was a fairly straightforward drama. But if you looked a little bit more underneath, you know, the sort of themes and everything, then there was an awful lot going on there. There was a whole fact, for instance, about the young girl who had darker skin. She was obviously she and it wasn't said where she came from, but she came from the south. So that could be
south of Denmark. Leaves it quite open, doesn't it?
Yeah, it really does. Yes, but there was the whole thing about her as well, how because people that had darker skin were looked on as being devil people and very, very bad luck, which was a kind of a nice commentary on how things are today in a lot of countries, including Denmark, Sweden, all these places that you think are slightly more liberal. And it happens in exactly the same way as it does anywhere else. These people are interlopers. They are coming in, taking our jobs, all this sort of stuff. You see it all the time. It's part of what's going on at the moment.
Well, that's what I was going to say. So I would say that on the whole, we don't necessarily look at Scandinavian countries and think of things like class, racial, or gender imbalances because they always top these indexes for, like, you know, happiest and fairest, you know, countries in the world. How would you say that? I mean, you've obviously touched on it there, but, you know, there's three quite definite strands of imbalance to say class, race, and gender. How do you think the film sort of tackles each of these and sort of maybe does tie them to the present day?
I'm surprised that you think that the Scandinavian countries come across like that, because you watch an awful lot of Scandinavian dramas and it's right through all of these things, the imbalances within the society.
Not how they're presented by the UN, though. Everyone says they're all happy and love each other.
yeah, but on one hand, you get the whole Nordic, Swedish, Scandinavian thing where, you know, it's all flat pack furniture and everybody has great summers, you know. But and the other side of that is the fact that, like, suicide rates are very high in a lot of countries, and there's a lot of nationalism in the countries. Now, what the film showed was this isn't a modern phenomena. This is something that has been going on since probably the start of these nations being pulled together in the first place. Because if you think about it, a lot of nations were pulled together from sort of disparate areas and made into a country. Suddenly you are Denmark. You're not one of the regions. So there's all this sort of region tension that would be going on anyway. And then when you go over that, people will look to other people to look down on. So it's the people who come in from the outside. So it's been there forever. And the film put that across quite nicely. And obviously there's a lot to do with the likes of Dushenko, or Schenko, as a lot of people called him. There was all theirs and graces to do with him. And it was to do with how the landowners were also the judges. So therefore they ruled the land. For you. And they ruled the law as well. And you saw it in multiple occasions in this film where, on the one hand, he would instigate something that was totally against the law. It usually involved violence. And then in the very next scene, he would turn around and say, oh, by the way, you can't do that because that's illegal. And I'm the sheriff here. So therefore, you're not allowed to do it. So it's the absolute power that these people had within their own kind of fiefdom, the way that they treated anybody who worked for them. There was a mention of, like, the way that all of the landowners, not just the Schenko, how they treated their female staff. They just sort of raped them in turn. He just went round them all. You know, they got 3 or 4 people to hold them down, and then he did what he wanted, you know, and it's just absolutely crazy. But you can understand why people didn't do anything about it, because they had no power. It was the power was all sewn up. And even the king and the court of the king didn't have power over these landowners, because at one point they say Ludovic has managed to unite all of the landowners. No one does that. So what is what has he done that's so bad that's united all of these landowners into one group? So it's just it reflects exactly what's going on just now. It's all the 1%, and the fact is you can't get to be part of that 1% no matter how hard you try. The only way that Ludovic could realize his ambitions was spending 25 years building himself up from a nobody to an army captain, and coming back and having a plan about setting up a settlement. And therefore, when the settlement works, if it does work, then he becomes a lord of the lord of the manor, if you like. So that's kind of his ambition. That's the only way he can do it, because the other way to do that is to marry well in order to. And we saw there was elements of that as well, where Dyshenko's cousin was going to be getting married to him, and that was to bring together 2 houses, but it was a marriage of convenience as well, because her family was broke. So she had the title, but she didn't have any of the money. So and that's how these alliances and bonds are all formed. And that goes back to the whole House of the Dragon thing when I was talking about on the deleted scenes, where part of that is how they all come together through marriage and everything, no matter how unsuitable the marriage is. Because at one point somebody's going to get married to like an 8-year-old. And he says, "Oh, you don't. It's okay. You don't need to bed him until you're 14." So it's like, oh. So yes, exactly. But yeah, but back to the film.
Yeah, because she says,
there wasn't anything like that.
Yeah, they seem quite age appropriate. I mean, she does say to Adolf, who is Dyshenko's cousin, she says to Ludwig, you know, I don't love him, but my father will never allow me to break this off. And then there's a horrible wee moment when Dyshenko meets Ludwig for the first time, and he's like, you know, how do you feel knowing that there's boys that can make army captain in 6 months just because of, you know, who they are and sort of what they're born into? And he kind of shrugs and he's like, well, that's the rules. And he's like, good answer or something, he says to him. And it's all this, everything's just laced with sort of this kind of know your place type of feeling from these people who obviously had, you know, just through sheer birthright had acquired all this land and all these people that they were in charge of. And I think it does really go out of its way to, for me anyway, it felt like choice was a really big theme of the film, and about characters who did and didn't have a choice in where they sort of ended in life. Did that come across as much to you, or were you more sort of wrapped up in the other elements of it?
No, you're right. It did come across because there was very little in the way of choice for a lot of the characters in the film. They had to do what they're told, whether it was the staff that worked for Dyshenko, and you could see that at least his right-hand man was very uncomfortable about what was going on, but was pragmatic enough to realise that he was at the right-hand side of somebody who had a level of power, and he wasn't going to jeopardise that. Where there was other people who worked for them who were just outright sadists. They were former military, so therefore they were used to hurting people. And they had obviously made that choice a long time ago, in that they were going into the army, and therefore they were using their set of skills in order to further the aims of Dyshenko. It was very interesting. That scene that you mentioned where he told them about the army, you know, becoming a captain within 6 months. That scene was very, very telling in terms of the dynamic between the two of them, because he was invited to dinner and obviously he dressed up as best as he possibly could. And he came into the room where Dyshenko was. Dyshenko was at the far side of the room, and he beckoned him over rather than meeting him halfway. So they weren't meeting as equals. And when he got to it, and Dyshenko was standing there and he was pouring a drink, and he came over with the drink and he went like that and held it. And Ludovic started to move his hand forward, and then he went, took a drink from it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was a power thing, because that's, I'm not offering you a drink. I'm in charge here. This is my house. This is my territory. The whole area is my territory, and you are my subordinate. And that was an indication of sort of the power, or what was the perceived power dynamic, which quickly dispelled, because he was used to dealing with people who had made choices, who had decided, I have to submit to whatever form of, well, let's face it, it's torture for most people that they're getting put under. Whereas this guy comes in and basically he is not going to be having any of it. He's not like almost like an action hero type of character where he's very forthright and he's very, very confident, but he's confident enough not to bow down to him at any point and basically say, without really getting into any sort of slagging match or anything, just saying, well, no, I'm not going to be doing that. This is what I'm going to be doing. And just walking away a lot of time. And in fact, there's maybe 3 or 4 occasions where all he did was he just went away, rather than confront him. At one point, he nearly confronted him, and you could see the veneer of Dushenko's armor break just after that point when he pointed the gun at him. And he was just like, he was just holding it there, and you could see Dushenko, and he was all, you're not going to do anything. All that. But when he took the gun away, he was kind of thinking, fuck, he could have done something.
Oh, 100%.
Much,
Because obviously, I mean, for me, Dushenko came across as this sort of like, obviously spoilt little rich kid who was only sort of Billy Big Bollocks of people who were under him or not even physically or verbally a match for him. So what did you think of him as a villain? He's obviously quite violent. He's obviously very greedy for himself. What did you think of him as the sort of central antagonist in this?
Yeah, it was good because he never showed a lighter side, because sometimes they try and humanize these particular characters, giving them something that is redeemable about them. And there was absolutely nothing that was redeemable about him at any point. He was a wee shit from start to finish. He never changed. In fact, on some occasions, he doubled down on it. And he did come across at times like a bit of a petulant child that had just lost his dummy. And in a way that you could see why you might think that that would be a little sort of derivative, because we've seen that type of character before, but it worked perfectly here because of the circumstances on it, because these people have an expectation of others and how they will behave to you and how they will be subservient to you. And if you get that for a while, then that's just the norm. That's what you do all the time. You do not think of others as human beings, especially in the way that he treated the people who worked the land for him as tenants and things like that. They were basically like indentured servitude more than anything else. And they couldn't leave at any time, again, because of the law, because they'd signed contracts, no matter how bad it was. So yes, he was a wee shit, but I think it kind of suited the film in a very nice way.
Oh, definitely. Everything was a transaction for him, and anything that couldn't be bought, he couldn't understand why it couldn't be bought. And I think that's where you perhaps see Ludwig's morals come into it, because for him, it's not about a transaction. It is about building something for himself, obviously, because of his upbringing, his sort of abandonment, and then his time spent in the army, which you assume has distilled some sort of personal discipline and a sense of right and wrong and duty and all the rest of that in them. So as a contrast to Dushenko, who is just a horror, just a violent, disgusting, odious little man, I think that Ludwig is a nice contrast. He's sort of craggy, quietly confident, but you have all these sides to him where, he's really gentle with the traveller girl who ends up joining them, and he's, sympathetic towards people that want to come and join his cause. But he is still quite complex, because he does things that are quite questionable, and as you say, lost his temper and he pulled a gun out. Obviously, this is Mads Mikkelsen, who I would, watch him reading the phone book. But what did you think of his characterization? Because we are dealing with a real person here. This was a real...
Well, we are dealing with a real person who has been adapted for the screen. Let's be straight about this, because we can't call on anybody who was around at the time that knew him personally. Let's face it.
No, no.
But yes, you're right. His character was quite complex. At the start, he kind of lived up to the title of the film, The Bastard, because he was not a nice guy. For the first, maybe, I would say, almost the first half of the film, he was not a nice guy. He was single-minded in what he was trying to achieve. He was brusque. He had no time for people. He had no sympathy for people. When he took on the husband and wife who were hiding from Dushenko, and he took them on, he didn't pay them. He would give them boarding lodgings, but he says, no, I'm not giving you wages. And they knew that they couldn't, there was nothing they could do about that. He was pretty horrible to everybody he met. Initially, it was pretty horrible to that wee kid, but mind you, she was stealing from him as well. You know, so there is all
Swings and roundabouts.
Yeah. So, like, for the first half of the film, it was very single-minded. He was quite happy to get his hands dirty, to get involved in everything, but he wanted everything perfect. He was almost like setting things up for his future triumphs, which hadn't happened, or when he was even unsure if anything was going to happen in that. So he set up the house with a housekeeper, and everything had to be in its right place. Everything had to be parallel, as if it was this grand country house, which it wasn't. It was basically a farmhouse, which had a couple of proper rooms, and like there was the areas where there was just like a curtain over it where the wee girl slept and all this sort of thing. So yeah, he had these ideas about what he needed to do and how to get there, and that didn't involve actually being not so much nice, but he had no reason to engage with people on a personal level. With him as well, there was a sort of parallel here. Everything that he was doing was transactionally based as well. It was all towards an end, which obviously wasn't quite in the same way that Dushenko was doing it, but it was still there. So there was kind of parallels with these two characters in the way they behaved. Now, he had a capacity for change given his upbringing, the fact that his mother was a maid, and also the fact that, like you say, he'd been away for 25 years. He'd learned discipline. He'd learned how to deal with people in a situation that requires a clear head. Obviously, any sort of battle situation, anything where you're training people up to kill people, which basically that's what it comes down to, and not get killed yourself and not get your men killed. So there was that. So even just that is complex enough in the first half, but then he started to change. He started to engage with the people that was around him, sometimes through circumstances with the housekeeper. There was a small girl as well, because they get involved with all the sort of outlaws that were in the surrounding woods and pulled them in to help him. And he did become more sympathetic to the child. Partly that was through the housekeeper as well, because she just gave him a hard stare when the kid was sitting outside. She didn't say it. Did you notice that? He was sitting there on his bed, I think it was, and she was standing at the door, and she just looked at him. And prior to that, he'd kicked this kid out of the house. Nope, you can't stay here. You know, there's no room for you. I've got no time to look after a child. And he just went, oh, and opened the door and let the kid back in. And that's all it was. It was pressure from someone around him, and he had that capacity within him in order to actually do that. And I think in a way it was kind of fearful. He didn't want to do that, because obviously from a young age, he was in charge of his own destiny, and it was just him. He didn't have to have anybody that couldn't look after themselves around him. So if he's looking after an army unit, they can all look after themselves. They know what they're supposed to be doing. They've all been trained. But setting up this sort of prototype family unit within the farmhouse and working that way, this was all kind of scary territory for him. It wasn't easy. So yes, it was a very good transition, and it felt quite natural the way that kind of transitioned as well, because he was very stoic. Like you say, he didn't give a lot away in terms of expressions, let's face it, which, you know, like say, if somebody looks like Mads Mikkelsen, you don't really care if he changes his expression.
Nah.
What do you think?
Well, I mean, I absolutely see what you see. I find him very conflicting at first, and I was kind of like, well, if he's supposed to be this big hero and, you know, trapped up in these notions of sort of, you know, destiny and forging a country, I was like, I actually don't like him as a character. But then the more sort of snippets you understood of his background, it all sort of made sense as to how he was, who he was, as you say, you know, used to people being self-sufficient around him or just, you know, following orders or all this sort of thing. And the change in him definitely felt quite natural, definitely not cheesy, definitely not shoehorned in for the sake of, you know, creating a third act or whatever. It did feel very, very authentic. And I think that, again, I suppose it's testament to how much this is slightly more than just your bog standard period drama, because as a male lead, he was definitely very interesting and very complex. And as I say, not somebody who you necessarily like straight away, but you obviously understand he's set up in opposition to Dushenko, who you can immediately dislike. So you are kind of rooting for him no matter what, because he's not as bad as the sort of other land barons, I suppose. But I do think he's definitely one of the more interesting males in period dramas. I think obviously this is definitely has a more Western slant, but typically in period dramas, men are sort of there to be the love interest, or, you know, they're not very fleshed out, whereas he definitely was a very fleshed out character, I thought, with lots of different pieces to him, which, as I say, the more you learned, the more you understood of him. But I think that's also testament to the female characters. You touched on Anne Barbara there with her scathing, withering looks. I was slightly terrified of her as the housekeeper. And then you had Adel, who was betrothed to Dushenko, but she hadn't said yes to an engagement yet. Don't blame her. What did you think then? Because these to me were the two sort of main female leads. What did you think of their depiction? Because they each come from very, very different backgrounds. Obviously, Anne Barbara is a tenant and therefore a servant, as you said, essentially. And Adel is from money in theory, but doesn't really have much of a life either. I suppose they kind of both have their own burdens to bear. It's just that Adel does it in fancier dresses, I guess. What did you think of them? Because the book is actually called The Captain and Anne Barbara, so presumably she did play this enormous part in his life.
Yeah, well, you can kind of see that. The character of Anne Barbara was probably most interesting in the whole film, because she started off as a side character, really, because she was the wife of the tenant farmer who was in hiding from Dushenko. And obviously the tenant farmer started playing a sort of a sidekick role to Ludwig, and she was very much in the background. But as the film went on, her role became more and more prominent because she was around all of the time. She was a strong character, like I said before, about the way she changed Ludwig's opinion about taking the child in. So she developed through the film, and what her ultimate aim was it was fairly simple stuff that she was wanting. She wanted to see the sea, for instance. That was one of her main goals. She wanted to see the sea, and she wanted to get as far away as possible from the situation she was in, which is very, very difficult when you don't have money. And obviously she didn't have money to begin with because she was working for nothing. And then that slightly changed, and at one point she left only to come back again and sort of renegotiate her deal. So she became more and more powerful in terms of the drama itself. And then she had obviously like a major part to play in the third act, which we will not talk about because it would
spoilers.
It would give a bit away. On the other hand, the other character was interesting, but just not quite, very much in the background. She didn't have very much screen time, this other character. She came across as being quite a pathetic character because of the circumstances she was in. Now, that story has been told time and time again as well, of people who are having to do something they don't want because of the fact that their family has lost status, their family is, they have the name but not the money to back it up. So there's a sort of quiet desperation in that situation as well, which she masks very well. You can see it coming through, but it's masked very well because of her upbringing and of her expectations. You see that she wants to make a better life for herself, and like you said before, it's going to be really difficult because her father has basically sold her off. Her father says, look, you need to do this. We're broke. This is going to help support not just you, but obviously extended family as well, because I think that's the way that it used to kind of work. If you married into a family, then by extension you would be supporting them in some way, whether it would be through work or just through like some sort of monthly stipend or whatever, you know. So so there was a lot at stake for her, and by doing what she was trying to do, as in set herself up with the captain, then that was kind of dangerous. But she read situations very well, and that had to do with her upbringing as well, because she was intelligent and she was obviously well read and everything as well. And they didn't really show any of that. You just got that impression, and you got that impression because of the way she was able to stand up to Dushenko on most occasions and basically better him. And that he, even at one point where he resorted to violence against her, it was one slap, because as soon as it happened, she says, basically, do it again, go on. And he couldn't, because he was pretty much scared of her, because it was somebody who was at his level and was standing up to him. And it was somebody who was obviously more intelligent than him. And he knew he would be in deep shit if that happened. So in a way, the two characters were looking for a way out of their situation. Very different ways out of their situations, to be honest. But they were both very strong characters, and they were very, very strong performances as well. The actor who played Anne Margaret, I can't remember her name.
Amanda Collin.
Amanda Collin, yeah. I previously saw her on Raised by Wolves, the sci-fi drama that Ridley Scott did. It was a TV show, and she's excellent in that. Very little expression and everything, so everything has to come through the performance and the way she characterizes it. And it was slightly similar here in the way that she held a lot of stuff back. She didn't let her emotions get the better of her. Everything was quite practical. Even her interactions with Ludwig in the most unsexy sex scene that you can imagine. I just want to come in because it's cold outside, and then it was, your heart belongs to another, my heart belongs to another. Bump, bump.
But we might as well.
Yeah. Did you notice how that changed though when they were going along? Because at first it was that sex scene, and it was really, really, it was like very cold and sterile, and it was, well, you can go into that, I suppose, with the lighting and all that. It was lit very gloomily, but later on when they were at it again, it was like candlelight and all this sort of stuff.
It was. I can't imagine. Yeah, I just think that everyone, like, it's particularly in the sort of like Anne Barbara and her husband, like Johannes, when you first meet them, like they're filthy and everything looks matted. I just can't imagine wanting to actually like strip your clothes off in a place that looks so cold and so desolate, and everyone just looks so like pinched in. But that as an aside, I thought both the women were both trapped obviously by circumstance, and as you say, both sort of socially conditioned to not allow their emotions to ever get the better of them, and both obviously very intelligent. You know, Anne Barbara knows how to keep a house, work the land. She knows how the sort of the social hierarchy works and how much she can get away with. And the same goes for Adel. You know, as you say, she's obviously very, very intelligent. She could definitely run rings around Dushenko verbally. And despite the fact that she is in the sort of, she doesn't have the upper hand in her relationship with her betrothed, she still gives as good as she gets. So she's not just there to be the sort of the pretty face or the wife who'll give the ear. She definitely is more of a challenge to Dushenko than I think he ever anticipates. But then so is Anne Barbara. But again, I like the fact that, again, despite the fact that there were some sort of, you know, cliches of, you know, fancy costumes and wigs and all the rest of it, I did feel the women had more to them than in your traditional period drama. And again, that's why to a certain extent it almost reminds me of Vicky Krieps' character in The Dead Don't Hurt, because she stands out immensely for her intelligence and her practicality and her refusal to kowtow in that. So again, sort of defying expectations for the era, I suppose, for the women in this film. definitely sort of more fleshed out characters. We'll come back to sort of the kind of plot and that sort of thing, but you touched on it there. It's very gloomy. It feels cold, and it's one of these films that I feel like when you're watching it at first, when he first goes out to that land, I felt cold. It just looks so abandoned, and so so the landscape obviously is just this huge part of the film because he needs the landscape to work for him. What did you think in terms of like cinematography, soundscape, score, all of that? How did that contribute to how you felt about this heath that he was in charge of?
Yeah, it was quite a traditional sound on the film in that it mixed the elements that you would expect with this vast open landscape. So there was lots of wind. There was always some sort of noise going on in the background, whether it be anything to do with sort of the elements or even like the farmyard animals and stuff. And on top of that, you had this soundtrack, which was cello-led. It was a sort of cello-led ensemble, which fitted really, really nicely with that. It worked very well in terms of the sound design as well. And it gave that impression of space, and it also gave the impression of it being dramatic as well. Mm-hmm. And then when you see that up on the screen, you were, like I mentioned right at the very top, that it was these vistas, open, nothing there, howling wind, and then you get this cello, and you're going, yep, I know exactly what it's like here.
Yeah.
The way that they used the colour palette as well indicated a lot of what was going on, because initially when he's out on the heath, it's beautiful. The heather's out, so there's lots of purples, it's lots of colour, and the sun's out and it's like a blue sky and everything. So you get that sense of optimism to begin with, and you know that they're doing that just because this isn't going to happen. It's not going to be like that all the time. It is going to change, and within 2 minutes, when he's doing all the boring into the heath, it changes to like rain and darkness and wind, and it goes through all of the elements right away. So that gives you, within the space of about 5 minutes, you've got the ideal situation, and then you've got all of the realities as well. So without anybody saying, "Oh, it's really bleak out there," it's set. You know exactly what you're set up for, and the way that it goes about showing all the different elements of it, sort of visually rather than talking about them, it's done through lighting, and it's done through the way that it's actually filmed as well. If you think about it in terms of all the stuff that happens in Deschinkel's sort of country house, there are always a lot of people about. It's always busy. The camera's moving, like sort of in and out of the people. It's all kind of nicely lit, obviously, because anything at night, that's always candle lights. There's a lot of people. They're all well dressed and everything. So that gives you that whole impression of the wealth and the sort of opulence of that. But when you see anytime, like what they call it, King's House, which is what he called his estate, it seems to be always the first shot of it is of the house itself from the outside, and it just looks really bleak because it's weather beaten, it's brown and it's grey, and all these sort of pale blues come in to indicate all the frost and everything like that. So there's that total contrast about what one group of people is dealing with and what the other group of people is dealing with. So I thought it worked really, really well.
Yeah, I liked what you were. I felt that whenever you were inside Ludwig's house, it felt tight, very intimate, and the camera was usually quite static because it was like they were on top of each other, and there was this dark wood, and it just felt very claustrophobic. And then the minute you went to Deschinkel's estate, everyone was in like pastels, and there was all this opulent food out, which they did quite a lot of close-ups into about him eating all these like amuse bushes and all this sort of thing.
Yeah.
That he was eating. So there was definitely quite a contrast there as well. I just think some of the shots, like there was like I can't remember if it was a sunrise or a sunset, but there's this like blood orange sun across this sky, and then the camera just pulls right back, and as you say, it's the sheer size and scale of this project that he essentially has taken on. And to me, I was like, oh, I'm so up for this. I love a good landscape in a film that really is gonna show you exactly, as you say, you went from this hope where you're like, oh, blue skies, heather, to pissing sideways, and everyone's in this like dark, itchy looking clothing where it doesn't even look like it's comfortable to be out doing this work that seems never ending because it just goes on and on and on forever. And I think they really use the color palettes in particular. I think they've used so well to just indicate all these like myriad little things. So not even just about where you are, but who you are and the social standing as well.
Yeah.
And of course, there's that moment where Ludwig thinks he's done his best in terms of dress, where he goes up to Dushenko's house and he says, "Your wig is full of fleas." And it's a dark wig, and he replaces it with this white, fluffy cloud looking thing that he puts in his head. And I think everyone's aware that it looks ridiculous, but it's this notion that it's the done thing as well. So even that, just swapping the colours around on the wigs, I thought was quite a pointed moment.
Yeah. The fact that before he actually goes to it wasn't a dinner, it was a festival or something, wasn't it? It was like a sort of autumn festival. When he's in the house getting ready, and Anne Margaret says, "Oh, put your collar this way because it hides some of the stitching. It makes you look less poor." All this sort of stuff. Yes, and the fact that he took so long getting the wig ready and all this sort of stuff. And it was immediately obvious what the contrast was there. It worked particularly well. Yeah, nice work.
One weird thing that I thought about this film is they do sort of try to use humour, I think, for certain situations. So there's the guy, Trapod, I think his name is, who constantly talks about his hemorrhoids and how he can't do long journeys.
Yeah.
His arse is really sore. And then you've got the scene where Dushenko is being extremely violent towards Johannes, who is Anne Barbara's husband. And his sort of manservant says, "Sir, you're losing the crowd." Did you think that as odd as I did? Because I felt it didn't quite work.
It was a wee bit strange. I could understand the comment about you're losing the crowd here because he's so self-absorbed that he thinks everybody's with him anyway, and he wouldn't be looking to gauge what the opinion of the crowd was. He would be thinking, yeah, they're all with it. They're all with me, even though I'm torturing this poor guy here. He wasn't interested in that until his right-hand man said that. So I can understand that. But yeah, and that was a bit weird, but I could understand why it was there. It was to kind of emphasize the fact that he is in charge, but there is a sort of groundswell of opinion that if he wasn't there tomorrow, everybody would be quite happy with that. They're not looking up to him. They're, as I've said a couple of times, it's all subservience. They are beholden to this landowner because he basically rules over them. Well, literally rules over them. He's a landowner and he's the sheriff, so therefore he's he's got it all covered. The hemorrhoids thing, yeah, I did like it at the end though when he said, how are the hemorrhoids? And he says, "I've decided to stop talking about them." Which
it was literally the only thing his character had said. And then there is a scene as well where I think one of the times when Ludwig is going to, as you say, they make the joke about how he's managed to unite all the landowners, but they also say about, the king wouldn't know what he's signed to because he's pissed in his bedroom all the time. It did seem like a really odd. I get that obviously, life wasn't all like very straight-laced and serious. People did crack jokes even back in the 1750s when life was a bit more shit. But it just, for me, it didn't really fit with the film, I think. It was just
no, I can understand why they thought it necessary to bring in a little lightness into certain elements because it could be kind of heavy going, but yeah, maybe not. Just encourage your convictions and all that. You go with what you know. If you've got a vision for this film, then you kind of stick with it. You don't need to add in anything. I did particularly like the fact that at that festival, I was half expecting there to be a scene in a ballroom where there was going to be dancing and stuff. But that's just my conditioning for period dramas. That they usually have some sort of like the meeting between Ludwig and Adele beside the lake. I thought initially, that's going to happen on the dance floor. But and I was glad that didn't happen. It probably wasn't done for budgetary reasons more than anything else. It's much easier to shoot two people beside a bit of water rather than organises like dancing lessons for a cast of hundreds.
50 extras, yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, as I say, I just didn't think it worked for me because I was more sort of into the kind of the meteor stuff.
Yeah.
I suppose finally, what were some of your kind of standout moments in the film? Any sort of particular elements of it that you thought really worked, or any characters you really liked, or plot points? What was the kind of standout bit for you?
It was usually just the small elements of it where Ludwig would actually indicate to another character his approval or disapproval, depending on the situation, by like the slightest nod of his head and things like that. And people understood that and people got that. So I think that the standout for me was that kind of minimal performance. It could have been, there was scope there to make it a lot bigger than it actually was, because he was obviously quite a large, strong character. But the fact that it was played in such a way that it was just wee bits. I liked all the sort of interactions with the child as well. That was nice. When what did she call them? Little Pops or something?
Little Pops, yeah.
Yeah.
Pops.
I mean, that was nice. And the fact that she swore all the time as well, that was because that's all she knew. And it had to be pointed out to her that she shouldn't be swearing all the time. So I kind of liked all that. It changed the film in such a way that you weren't just concentrating on this sort of power struggle between Ludwig and the Schenkel. If it was that all the time, it would have been pretty heavy going. Now, I know you love all gloomy, so really serious stuff. Sometimes you need a bit of light, that's all I'm saying.
I know, but hemorrhoid jokes just don't do it for me, John.
Yeah. You don't have hemorrhoids, so you just can't relate to that at all. That's the problem. If you had hemorrhoids, you'd probably be talking about them all the time.
Maybe I would. Maybe I would think that the idea of a horse-drawn journey for 40 minutes would be too much, but it just didn't mean anything to me. For me, I actually think it was you've obviously touched upon it, so I'll not reiterate what you've said, but for me, it was that first initial meeting between the Schenkel and Ludwig. I felt it really set out its stall as to, who was going to get the better of who, and just the sort of tension in the room was obviously very palpable, and I really, really enjoyed it. I like that kind of scene where they don't have to get into fisticuffs. They don't even have to get into verbals. There's just that dynamic between them instantly through body language where you just think, yeah, you two are going to end up, somebody's going to come out of this for the worse and you don't know which way it's going to go. So I really, really like that. So would you recommend this film to people who are looking for a nice weighty period drama for a Sunday eve?
Absolutely. It's well worth your time. It's a very well produced film, and crucially, it holds your attention. You're never bored. You never waver in your sort of interest in the characters and in the story itself, which can be difficult with period films sometimes because, like I say, if you're talking about the sort of the weight of expectation based on your sort of previous viewings and things, what you expect to come from a period drama, thriller, whatever, then it can be difficult. It does exactly what it sets out to do, and I think it's very, very successful in what it actually produced.
Yeah, I would agree. I would definitely recommend it. I think pacing's tight, the cinematography stunning, characterization is great. And because it is this nice sort of genre blend, it is sort of Western meets period drama. There's lots of familiarity there, even if you don't necessarily know the time period or the country or what was going on at the time. There's enough there from the genre to sort of keep it familiar, but not boring, still really, really compelling. So I would definitely recommend you seeking it out. It's not streaming anywhere just now. I don't believe we have. I've just purchased a DVD version of it, but it's certainly worth keeping an eye out for because I think it's one it's just a really kind of, I felt it flew under the radar in UK cinemas, but definitely is one of the standouts that I've seen for a long, long time. Really well done.
Yeah, it'll pop up somewhere. It was only last year, wasn't it? That it was actually released, so it will come to service because there's stuff coming all the time from various sort of sources. So, and they're all looking for stuff. So yeah, it will turn up somewhere, definitely.
And ultimately, Mads Mikkelsen is a name. So you would assume that would carry it enough for it to sort of find a landing place somewhere. So that's us for The Promised Land. But has there anything else been happening in the world of entertainment this week that has caught your eye? Any sort of movie news, TV news, anything that you thought was worth discussing?
Well, there was the whole thing about The Boys, the Richard Kripke interview about that, with the new season of The Boys is starting up in a couple of weeks, and
indeed,
the opening scene, he's revealed that the opening scene from the 4th season is Homelander on trial, which seems
the timing.
Yeah, I know. He did say it was accidental, but he also said it was kind of inevitable that it would hit that mark at some point in real life as well as on the TV show. Now, there's obviously a wee bit of controversy about The Boys, some basically in terms of the way that they portray certain characters and some things to do with the themes of the show.
Mm-hmm.
And it seems to be that a lot of people are only now realizing exactly what the message behind The Boys was, and they're a wee bit annoyed about it because it's not the message that they thought it was.
Do you know how who's that comedian? He did this whole thing about Americans not understanding irony. I can't remember his name, but this is Americans not understanding irony. I cannot imagine watching that TV show and thinking that Homelander is the good guy.
I know. It makes absolutely no sense. And he's quite right. And he said, if people are going to stop watching this, fine, go and watch something else. Just away you go.
Go
Which
and watch something that appeals to your sensitivities. I mean, it is, for me, I cannot wait for this to come back. I think it's one of the best shows I've seen in a long, long time. I absolutely love it. The characters are all completely batshit. But it's a kind of sad day for nuance, I guess, or irony that there were people watching this in a very different way, because it does make you wonder about, and I said this to you when we were chatting about it yesterday, it does make you wonder if satire is going to be a thing that still exists in years to come, because there's so little room for this notion of taking the piss, really. And I think it'll be interesting to see how this season pans out in terms of, do Amazon release viewing figures? Do they do that?
They sometimes do, but they talk about it in sort of vague terms. I don't think they give exact figures because, again, it's a negotiating tactic for them when they're talking. A bit of it, if something's really massive, like Rings of Power, for instance, they said that was like the top, like TV series watched within a week or something. They've got some of these things that they say, but they tend not to talk about them. But I think they just let the sort of social discourse, speak for itself with regards to, what people think is popular stuff. And obviously, when the likes of The Boys is out there and there's memes and there's lots of these wee sort of TikTok videos and stuff like that, then that speaks volumes about, how popular it is if it's actually out there without them actually having to do anything, which is actually quite clever, I suppose.
Yeah. I just wonder if, there is this great abandoning of it now that people have realised that it is satire. Would Amazon, would they shit the bed on it and would they pull it, do you think? Or do you think it'll keep going to its natural end? Because I think they have said that season 5 will be the last anyway. I think they have come out and said that. Is that right? So it would be interesting to know if there was this mass exodus of viewers. I don't think there will be, because I think, just from people that I know that talk about it and know how fantastic it is a piece of television, but the thought of it starting with this trial, I think, is really just fantastic. It goes to show how sort of, not brave, I don't want to use that word, but how, I don't know, daring, I guess, maybe a wee bit with its satire that it is, that it's so on the nose as to what's going on right now.
Yeah, it's, I don't think they'll lose any or very many viewers because it's so big. And this only generates more publicity for
that
it.
Is true.
Because if people said, if this is pissing people off that I don't like, then maybe I should go and start watching this as well. But I always thought it was fairly obvious. It was pretty much on the nose in terms of what they were trying to get across. So, you just don't know.
It's definitely one that we'll be keeping an eye out for when that starts up again. I'm so looking forward to seeing how this all pans out. Obviously, we had Herogasm in the last series, and there was some
Yeah.
very, very bizarre imagery in the opener for that. So I'm like, where do you even go from there if that's been your sort of, where do you go next in order to sort of gross people out?
So there was something obviously to do with Hitman as well. So you had flagged up one. What was that?
So Richard Linklater had said that he specifically sought out Netflix for this film, which obviously, if you look on Twitter or X or whatever it's called, has proved to be a huge hit. People are absolutely loving it. But he said that he went to Netflix because, and this is just a quote, studios aren't interested in this type of film anymore, which I actually couldn't quite believe because, Glenn Powell, ever since his sort of breakout role, as it were, in Top Gun Maverick, I mean, people really, really, obviously, he's a sort of all-American boy, isn't he? He's that kind of classic, good-looking box office fodder. And his films have performed really well. And I think that the premise of it, because it is a kind of true crime, sort of loosely based, true story, there's kind of action, there's thriller, there's romance. I am so surprised that this would get knocked back from any major studios for cinematic release.
Well, not really, because it's one of these mid-budget films that we've touched on in the past, in that
I suppose
it's not expected to perform massively. Obviously, the likes of Richard Linklater is a name director. Glenn Powell is a name actor, but they don't neither of them draw in the big crowds yet. Glenn Powell, I think, will. I think he's only going to get bigger on the back of the likes of this and Top Gun Maverick. He's obviously proven himself to be very versatile and very charismatic, sort of leading man. In some quarters, he's been talked about as sort of potential movie star, in that he's one of these, like a named actor that can guarantee a film's opening. It may not guarantee a film's like makes it gross, but a lot of it's got to do with the opening weekend as far as Hollywood's concerned, how many bums on seats, how much money they actually make. So he's got that potential, but he's not quite there yet. And a lot of studios are not willing to put money into these films. They'll put money into like a lot bigger films, like The Fall Guy, for instance. Quite happy to put an awful lot more money into that, which probably cost at least 100 million more than this film cost to make, to be perfectly honest. And obviously they're expecting big returns based on the actors that get in. So obviously they are big name actors. It's Margot Robbie and Ryan Gosling.
Oh, it's Emily Blunt. Sorry. It's Emily Blunt.
Sorry, Emily Blunt. My apologies. Yes, so they've got that, but it didn't perform in the way that they thought it would.
I know. Which
basically
is interesting.
Because it was all right. It wasn't brilliant, that's why.
Well, this is the thing. So Hitman, you do wonder now if studios are kicking themselves, because for me, and I've said this, it was okay. It was nothing we hadn't seen before, but it was definitely enjoyable, and he definitely is fantastic in it. Like his comedic timing and everything, and his facial expressions and all the silly disguises they have him in, he is brilliant in it. But you do wonder if, because people are raving about it so much, I actually think it's sitting at something like 90% on Rotten Tomatoes. You do wonder if studios are sort of kicking themselves, going, we backed the wrong horse. Maybe? I don't know. Because is it only a hit because it's on Netflix and people don't have to leave their house to watch it? Question. I don't know.
That is a big deal for people. The fact that it is instantly available. It's something brand new. It's something that people are talking about, and you can watch it without actually leaving your home. It makes such a difference. And in a lot of ways, Netflix are very good at that sort of thing. They push these films. I mean, I get an updated email from them every week saying, oh, we've added a program you might like, we've added a film you might like. And this was one of them. I got an email about that yesterday, I think it was, and it'd only been out a day, and it was like, oh, we think you might like this. So that bumps up the viewing numbers right away, because people are, oh, something brand new, it looks good, quite a glossy movie, it'll be quite entertaining, something for a Saturday night, fire away into it, So and they're willing to put the money into that because they're not promoting it in a way that is different to the way that they're promoting any other thing. That they're not having the same sort of billboard campaign and probably TV advertising campaign that a cinema release would have. Now, I know Hitman played in a couple of cinemas last month, I think, and Richard Linklater was there doing like Q&As and things like
Yeah.
that for them.
Yeah.
Basically, and that's a way to publicise it, but you're also getting money back from that because you're getting an audience coming in. So it's a very small sort of cinema run, but it's all about, their subscribers and making sure that people are continuing to do that. So yeah, they're willing to take more risks, and it's not that they're risk averse. They're quite happy to drop things if it's not working. They don't really do it.
Yeah.
Films are different to TV stuff. If a TV show doesn't work, then they will drop it and just say that's fine. There's plenty of other content out there. But with a film, it's always going to be there. If Netflix own it, then they will have that on their service, and it's just another piece of content for them. And I know we hate talking about content, but it's the way that works.
But that's what it is to them.
Yeah, of course. There was a report that just came out the other day there about sort of Netflix in the last 6 months, and they've like done like sort of massive numbers in terms of like what they're actually getting out there. The second half of 2023, they had 16,000 series, movies, and specials on their service.
16,000.
Yep, which accounts for 90 billion hours of worldwide viewing, which is just it's pretty much unbelievable. Just how much are people actually watching? It's crazy. It really is crazy.
Insane.
Mm-hmm. Yep, it's really, really crazy. But then when you look at it for some of like, what did you think Netflix's biggest movie hit has been? Off the top of your head, what do you think it is?
I have no idea. One of the Knives Out, that was a Netflix film, wasn't it? The second one.
Mm-hmm. Yep. It was a good shout, but it wasn't. It was Leave the World Behind, the Julia Roberts, Mahershala Ali film. Yep. 121 million views. So it's safe to say that would be in a sort of similar budget range to Hitman.
Yeah.
In that it didn't have like a lot of overtly special effects. It wasn't like a space drama or anything. It was more a family drama set after an incident. And
I read the book. I didn't.
Yeah.
I knew it'd been made into a film. I didn't realise that was a Netflix film though. Actually, so that's interesting.
Yep. So that was that, and it's a really, really good film. I haven't read the book, and I am one of those 121 million because it was actually a really, really good film, and the amount that it cost them to make that, they have made that back over
100%.
and over and over again, just through the fact that so many people have watched it, because that's what they base their numbers on: subscriber retention and number of eyeballs on a screen. And that's crazy numbers as well. 121 million people. You can't, I mean, how many films can you say that about? That you know that 121 million people have watched it. Certainly not in terms of cinema numbers.
No, and that's the thing. So it's in their interest, obviously, to have that. So, for example, to come back to Hitman, a lot of stuff on social media that I'm seeing just now is about that film. So if they've got everyone talking about it and you don't have a Netflix subscription, or you maybe gave it up, this is maybe one of these films where you potentially consider getting it back, or you would purchase a subscription so that you can join in with what everybody else is talking about. So the sort of pressure to get this content that everybody's talking about is what's going to keep them. Obviously with Amazon, it was the Boys, and it was the Lord of the Rings adaptations. With Disney, it's obviously all the Star Wars stuff. So that they're all constantly in this loop of just trying to find the next big thing that everybody's going to talk about, favorably, of course, in order to keep those numbers up. Now, as I say, Hitman was fine. It was entertaining enough, but I don't know. It's not something I would rush to recommend to people, which is interesting because it's performing really well in terms of reviews, and people are absolutely raving about it. And it obviously is going to be a big hit for them. If you log into your Netflix account today, I'm sure it's sitting at number one on sort of things watched. But it's just fascinating to me how this all works, because like that Julia Roberts film, I would never have thought of as sitting at number one. It's almost like you can't quite understand how the algorithm of all this all works.
Well, you kind of hit the nail on there with algorithm, because you see at the top of your recommendations stuff based on what you've watched. So if you haven't watched stuff like that, so
I'm just
that
laughing
you
because
will
mine's
get
like World
content.
War II in colour.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I think some of that's starting to bleed into mine because I get recommended the new Hitler and the Nazis thing that's come out on Netflix.
I swear I haven't logged onto your Netflix account.
Yeah, I'm starting to worry a wee bit. Yeah, no, but the algorithm does base it on what you have actually viewed and how you have interacted, because it asks you sometimes, do you rate this program? Do you rate this film? What do you think of it? Do you want to see more of this? So, like for instance, Hitman came up on my sort of number one recommended. You know how it comes up with sort of splash screen as soon as you go in, it gives you the big one, and it was that came up because it kind of fits in with what a lot of the stuff that I watch on Netflix. So yes, it does work that way. So if you don't watch those particular things, then you won't get the recommendations of the Julia Roberts, end of the world film. So yeah, so it can be a bad thing because then you're not getting exposed to other stuff. And there's stuff that I hear about when I've been listening to other podcasts, and it's said it's these things are on Amazon or whatever, but they just disappear because they're not really publicized in any way. There was that Orson Welles film. I can't remember what it was called. It's something like the Breath of the Wind or something. It was like one of these great unfinished film that had been sitting about for years, and somebody worked on it, completed it, and it was going to get a cinema release. And it was one of these ones that get caught up in the controversy in Cannes a couple of years ago when they said, it has to be in cinemas for 3 years or something, before going to streaming service. And this was a streaming service one. I can't remember if it was Netflix or Amazon, but there was all, the great unwatched Orson Welles film finally brought to the screen, and then it just disappeared. And it's on one of these services, but it's really difficult to find it because it doesn't get pushed up there.
Yeah.
So it's really, really weird that way, So.
And the thing is, the algorithm does serve you stuff that is, like, for example, like, do you want to watch Love is Blind Sweden because you watched the Valhalla murders? And I'm like, no, I don't, because that's a shite reality show, and that obviously was like one of my just silly cop drama sort of thing. But I don't even think the algorithm necessarily works all the time, because it's just like, oh, you watch this one thing in this one language one time, do you want to see the entire back catalogue? And you're like, no, that's not how this works. I am getting lots of monster movies now, obviously, because we watched Godzilla. But it's just, I mean, imagine what Sammy's Netflix recommendations look like. Do you want to watch part 14 of this shark drama?
Yeah, I can only imagine. And he'll be like, oh, yes, I do.
Yes, I do. Exactly that. Oh, God. So I think that just about wraps up this particular episode of the Moviescramble podcast. If you want to find us on social media, it's at Moviescramble in all the usual places. And if you want to drop John an email, it is podcasts@moviescramble.co.uk. Other than that, we will see you on the next one. Bye.
Bye.